from outside the 5. Mon looking that way. Got it! It's Rodgers! The Aggies win the game of the year!
Deep 6. First down at the 1-yard line. Ewers on the move, throws it back. Helms got it. And Gunnar Helm dives to the end zone. And Texas, after a slow start, jumps on top.
And welcome everyone to Lone Star Yell Fight, where we're talking all things college football, Texas Aggies, Texas Longhorns, from the greatest country in these United States. All right, everybody, welcome back to Lone Star Yell Fight. We have got our resident Aggie, Andy Tom Chestens here. I'm Jim Christopher, representing the University of Texas Longhorns. Two big games last weekend, Andy. We'll start with the Longhorn game first.
I like to look forward. Yeah, I'm not a person who likes to look backward. Look forward.
Back. You know, but it was a weird game in the sense that obviously the score. I think the game was a little closer than the score indicates. I think both defenses played well. The problem is that Texas turned the ball. They had their turnovers in like within the 30 of the goal line every time, versus the other way around. But 30-15 was the final. Longhorns played much better in the second half. Overall, like as a neutral observer, what did you take away from that game?
I think both defensive played well. I think neither quarterback, or I guess none of the three quarterbacks that played well, particularly well. And so if you get down to what went right, the turnovers were certainly a big factor, although Georgia had them well. I think just Georgia's defense played better than Texas's defense. Georgia was more opportunistic and seemed up for the challenge a little bit more than Texas was that night. I think if those two teams played again, you might have a different outcome or a closer game on the scoreboard. But I think this was the welcome that everybody outside of Austin was waiting for Texas to get to the SEC, and you saw that. I am disappointed in the fact that you also got to experience what is known throughout the land as SEC officiating, because that was some horse shit all over the place. Yeah. And we can talk about the pass interference, but there were bad calls everywhere around that field against both sides.
Yeah.
Why is that such a loaded statement now of both sides?
I don't know. I know, right? Both sides.
But yeah, it was a good football game. Texas did not show up in the first half, and it's one of the things that's not to toot my own horn, but I've talked about a lot with Quinn Ewers. He has very slow starts to football games, and when he has slow starts to football games, Texas has slow starts to football games. Georgia took advantage of it, and so it'll be really interesting to see. And I don't think this is going to happen this week, but Vanderbilt's not a bad team, and the big deal is not losing the game to Georgia. It's having Georgia beat you twice.
Yeah.
It's going to be really interesting to see how Sark and Ewers and the rest of the Longhorns respond this weekend in Nashville.
You know, Sark opened Pandora's box with pulling Ewers for the last two series of the first half. But something kind of I started to think about was, would Texas be playing like obviously I've said all year that I want the guy who's been in the system for 3 years to start, but is there an argument that Quinn's lack of athleticism could be holding Texas back when you're playing a team like a defensive team like Georgia, for example?
Yeah, well, I think when Arch went in the game, what I saw was that he did bring a different dimension because he can run the ball. Ewers is not a scrambler. It's not his game, and it shouldn't be a penalty against Quinn Ewers because he doesn't run the way Arch Manning does. Having said that, it's a good and bad situation with Arch because his inexperience absolutely showed as well as the ability to run. So it's great that he was able to scramble, pick up a couple of first downs, especially that one long run that he had, and give Georgia something extra to think about. At the same time, his inexperience and kind of locking onto receivers who weren't necessarily open didn't really help the offense move the ball any. So it's, good or bad. I'd still, if it's me, I still take Ewers' experience. I don't agree with what Sark did. I understand it. Yeah. I understand you trying to give your offense a spark and trying to get Ewers to reset in his brain. But I think the trouble that's going to cause the rest of the season potentially wasn't worth the risk. because now you do have you already had it in the fan base, and I know that doesn't really matter, but you already had enough people in the fan base who were clamoring for Arch Manning to be the starting quarterback. Now you've sown this seed of doubt with Quinn Ewers potentially that if I screw up, if I have a slow start, if something goes bad, I'm going to get benched maybe for a series, maybe for the rest of the game, maybe for the rest of the season. I don't know. There was the fake controversy that came out after the game about Ewers shutting it down and preparing for the NFL, which isn't accurate. It's not a thing he was going to do. But the fact that
stupid because he would drop in the draft stat. I mean, yeah. Anyway,
100%. Although he did that for high school. I think he stopped playing in the middle of his high school senior season to go prepare for college. So there is a history there. But it's not going to be Sark opened up that box, but I think it's going to be up to him and his coaching staff to manage that. The reality is Ewers needs to be mature enough to understand that he was not playing well. And it was a reset. He did go out to start second half and played the rest of the game. So
and played much better.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a penalty. And Sark seems to be true to his word that all he was doing was just trying to get Ewers to calm down a little bit. But I worry about that seed of doubt. The old saying goes, if you've got two quarterbacks, you don't have one quarterback.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't know how much adversity you guys are going to face over the next couple of weeks. Although, like we said, Vanderbilt's a salty team. We'll talk about that game in a little bit. Florida's playing better. Arkansas at home, and they hate you. You at least get them in the morning so that, I don't know if I don't know if they'll wake up in time to get to the stadium, but I don't know if Ewers is going to face the level of adversity he faced against Georgia possibly until the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So he's got some time to figure his stuff out too.
I do agree with that. And I do think, and I got roasted on Twitter for really not agreeing with benching Ewers for Manning, only because that one game felt like it was going to go that way. It didn't seem like it was worth creating an extra thing to look at for the rest of the season. Just for one game where that game really, like as we talked about, you and I privately, really did nothing to affect Texas's outlook for the season.
No, I mean, it's a high profile game. It was definitely the game of the weekend, and you had game day there. You had Kirk and Herbie there announcing the number one team, announcing the game on the primetime game of the week. All the things were there. It was set up to be the game. Texas kind of came out and laid an egg a little bit. Georgia had plenty to do with that. But as we've mentioned, we're in this new world of 12 teams making a playoff. Nothing that happened on that field is preventing Texas from making the SEC championship game, winning the SEC in their first year, or making the playoff. So nothing that happened on the field mattered ultimately. Not the way it would have when there's only 4 teams and it's all left up to a computer to decide who makes that playoff field.
Right.
That could be devastating. We've seen it plenty of times where one loss is enough to put you out of any kind of playoff picture, and all of a sudden you're hoping for a Sugar Bowl matchup that is worth going to New Orleans for. Not much is worth going to New Orleans for. This is, you guys still control your own destiny, and not even in a philosophical baseball way. Just win the rest of your games, you're fine.
Yeah. Well, you're right. Now, speaking of winning the rest of their games and being fine, A&M has been on a roll after losing to Notre Dame. And you guys shook off the Starkville curse last week, 34-24. But you told me you still felt like it was too sloppy.
Yeah, well, we tried our best to keep Mississippi State in that game for as long as possible, and I think we succeeded in that effort. It was really interesting to me because it was kind of a tale of two halves. Our offense played well in the first half. Our defense played like shit in the first half. I really enjoyed Elko's commentary to the reporter before going into the locker room at halftime. And she said, what's going wrong on defense? What's going wrong on defense? Everything. Nothing we're doing. We're going to have to play the way we're supposed to play. And they came out, I think they gave up close to 300 yards, 279 or something in the first half. 97 in the second half.
Yeah.
And the only time Mississippi State scored in the second half was when we turned over the ball, I think, at the 11-yard line. So, basically handed them a touchdown.
Right.
I like the idea that we have that amount of talent and that amount of skill that we can turn it on and get better with a couple of halftime adjustments. I don't like, and I guess, I don't think it's a trap game coming off of a bye week, but I think there is something to be said about having bye weeks and how your team prepares and getting mentally up for a game after a bye week and a game you're heavily favored. I think that line jumped from like 11 to 18 by the time the game started. It might have even been higher than that. And as much as the players should be focused on the 6 inches in front of their face and all the cliches.
All the cliche, yeah.
They know they're supposed to win that game. Mississippi State knows they're supposed to lose that game. And to give credit to Mississippi State, and I think we saw that a little bit against Texas too, with Van Buren at quarterback, they're going to beat a team they shouldn't beat by the end of this year. I'm glad it wasn't us. We certainly gave them every opportunity to. And ultimately, and A&M fans, I think, have to kind of get to this point. It is a double-digit win on the road in the SEC. That's nothing to be upset about. There are things within that game we could have done better and should have done better.
Yeah.
You really hope that our quarterback play is going to rise to the occasion this coming week against LSU, because it was really good against Missouri and okay for the first half and then really bad in the second half against Mississippi State. So we don't know what we're going to get out of the quarterback position coming Saturday. That's the biggest concern I have coming out of the game. I'm happy with the win. I'm happy that we're sitting at 6-1. I'm happy that, like Texas, A&M controls their own destiny and is currently on top of the SEC standings. And it's been a while since we started 5-0 in conference. I want to say 2016 or something like that. So it will be good to continue that winning ways. And I'm really hoping to see the Missouri version of this team versus LSU this coming weekend rather than the Mississippi State version of this team.
Well, let's get into that. That is
the Notre Dame version.
Right. Well, that is arguably the game of the week this week. I've even seen an ESPN update to my phone about the big rivalry game this week, and that being it. A&M LSU. A&M is favored by 1 and projected by ESPN's analytics to win 52% of the time. They're looking at total points to be 54. LSU's number 8, but I think it's a fake number 8. A&M's 14 and at home. How do you feel?
I think this is an ultimate toss-up game, and I'm not trying to get around making a pick or, who I think wins or anything, but we run the ball. LSU should be able to – they're not great at stopping the run. They're really weak. And it's interesting because LSU is known for their defense. They have been known for a number of years. And since, I guess, the 2019 national championship, they've gotten a reputation of finally figuring out how to play with all these great wide receivers they have on their team. Because that was always kind of the thing. You have all these great skill players, but you can't put it together. So we're going to rely on defense and win a lot of 14-10 type of games.
Right.
Since Brian Kelly has come aboard, especially with Jaden Daniels last year, they've become a very good offensive team. I don't know what to make of this LSU team, because if you look at them game by game, they beat a very overrated USC team at the beginning of the year. They probably should have lost to South Carolina, although they had some help from our wonderful SEC officiating crews. They probably should have lost against Ole Miss, but they managed to win. And ultimately, the record, you are who the record says you are, so they're a good team, and I'm not taking anything away from them. A&M's a good team, so it's going to be interesting from a strength perspective. I think for A&M to win this game, we're going to have to pass the ball downfield. We're going to have to take advantage of their secondary, which, again, even though they have great skill players back there, they don't play really well against the pass. Our strength is the run. LSU seems to be able to stop the run, although there's been games this season where they haven't done well against the run.
Right.
Flip the ball around. And I don't mean to be all over the place, but this is kind of what this game is. Their defense or their offense should be able to take advantage of the pass against us. They shouldn't be able to run the ball against us. And so I don't really know what we're going to get other than, I think the line opened at 3.5 and it's down to 1.5, like you said, because the money's coming in. All the prognosticators are picking LSU to win, and I get that. A&M for the last 10, 15 years has been a team that media guys would get behind, and we ultimately would let them down. So I understand why you don't pick A&M in this game. But these are two I don't even want to say evenly matched, but just weirdly matched teams where strengths are going to go up strengths in some of these cases. And so I don't know what we're going to get. I can tell you that if we get good quarterback play, we'll probably win the game. If we don't, we probably won't, because I don't know that we can put up 250 rushing yards against LSU.
Well, I mean, what is your thought, though, as Connor Wigman as the starter? Like, do you feel like, is he the guy that you're going to want to keep seeing develop, or do you think he's a stopgap for something else?
Well, the easy answer to that question is he's our starter, and he's the guy who should be starting. He has the best skill set amongst our quarterbacks. Marcel Reed did a great job filling in for him while he was hurt. I think what you see with Wigman a lot of the times is just a lack of reps, a lack of experience, because even though he is a junior, he's only started 7-8 games. He was injured most of last year, only got in the last few games of his freshman year. So it's a matter of when he's on, he's really, really good. But I think a good defensive coordinator and a defense that pressures him a lot can confuse him. This is going to sound like the ultimate cop-out, but I think part of his situation this last week against Mississippi State is that the teams were virtually wearing the same uniforms.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, yeah.
And I think that, as quick as you have to make a read in college football these days, there's a peripheral vision issue that might have come to play. Should it have? No. It sounds like a shitty excuse, but I think that's part of what was going on in that second half. And I think they gave him some looks he hadn't seen before. And when you haven't started a lot of games, there are looks you haven't seen before. When Connor Wigman's at his best, he can dissect a defense really quickly. That's part of his skill set, and make throws where they need to be made, where only his receiver can catch them. That sounds like what you want in a quarterback. He's also a guy who isn't a runner, but can scramble when he needs to. And when he's feeling really aggressive, he will. So good Connor Wigman wins this game for us. The Connor Wigman we saw in the second half against Mississippi State will be, lucky to stay in the stadium. The good news is defense travels, the effort travels. Though we're, I'm not worried about us getting blown out, but I think it's going to come down to a one possession type game in the fourth quarter. And I'd love to be wrong about that. I'd love A&M to come out and have a Missouri-like performance and put this game away by the halftime. I just don't see that happening. And again, in the SEC standings, a loss to
doesn't
LSU
really matter, right?
It doesn't matter from an SEC's perspective. It would matter potentially from a playoff perspective if you hope to be one of the at-large teams, because I think it's going to be really difficult for a two-loss team to get in unless they've won the conference championship. So a loss this weekend doesn't kill us. It's not the greatest thing, but a win would be a whole lot better.
Let me ask you this about the coaching, because you guys –
that's the hot take you were looking for, right? A win would be better?
Right. That's dynamite analysis. But I'm curious about what you think about the coaching, because on the one hand, you do have A&M's coach, which is new, versus Brian Kelly, who's been around the block. At some point, does that matter? Or do you think that Brian Kelly is maybe a little overrated as far as his ability to coach a football team?
I think historically there has been regular season Brian Kelly and then anything after December Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly's had a wealth of talent in his stops. He's had it at LSU. They've been an interesting team since he's been there. Seemed to be really good on offense, seemed to not be great on defense, which is not historically what LSU has been. It's not Mike Leach-ish in that kind of shift, right, but it's kind of in that weird realm where you've taken the history of a team and flip-flopped it. So you're a great offensive team, which helps you recruit great offensive skill players, but if you can't stop anybody when you need to, I don't know how you win big games. And that was kind of his history a little bit at Notre Dame as well. Yeah. So you get into a big bowl game, you get into a playoff game, and you get blown out. So
he got smoked in both playoff appearances that Notre Dame had.
Yeah, I don't think he's a bad coach by any means, but I don't think he is necessarily a top 5 kind of guy like he gets credit for being sometimes. I think that sometimes the job makes the man. And so I think a lot of the media, he's the coach at Notre Dame, he must be good.
Yeah.
And, there may be some truth to that. How do you get that gig if you're not a good coach? With Elko is certainly much younger in his coaching path, his coaching career. He's got a lot more to learn, but I'm kind of on the path of I like his defensive background. I like his ability to leave the offense alone for the most part and focus. I think he's good at kind of managing his attention across the team. But like we saw this past weekend, if his defense is not getting it done, and defense has to get it done in games in the SEC, he has the ability to go to his defensive coordinator and say, try this, do this, change that, and understand what he's talking about from a very systemic level. So I like that he's able to affect those changes quickly. I don't know that Brian Kelly is that hands-on with an offense anymore.
He's assumed the Mac Brown level of coaching at this point.
Yeah, and he's never been that kind of guy with his defense. So they're certainly coming from different points of their careers. Elko does not have the status that Brian Kelly does, but I would also say that Elko so far has done the thing that Jimbo couldn't do, is get 85 guys pulling in the same direction.
Right. And I
know there's no, our friend who we invited on the show this weekend who would not be able to quantify what that means. There is no stat that says pulling in the same direction, but you can watch this team not quit on plays. You can watch this team give effort to the whistle and through the whistle. You can watch a team that was heavily penalized towards the beginning of the year get better at that level of discipline as the year has gone on. So those are the things to me that a head coach brings to the table beyond the X's and the O's. And so I'm enthused about what Elko has done so far this year.
All right. Well, we're not going to spend too much time on Longhorn Vanderbilt, mostly because Texas is a huge favorite. And I would be worried about this game if Texas had beaten Georgia. I think Texas losing to Georgia is going to make sure everybody's a little bit more focused. I think I don't think it's a trap game anymore where it could have been very easily for the Longhorns. But I wanted to talk about.
But before we move on, I wanted to ask you a little bit on Diego Pavia because he is a guy who is a scrambler. He can certainly throw the ball. We saw that in the big win against Alabama. But he's a guy who is truly a dual threat quarterback. How has Texas's defense played against those guys in the last couple of years? Because I think most defenses have trouble with dual threat quarterbacks.
I think they played better than they had in the past of their history. I think Texas wants him to run because I think even with all the improvements, Texas's front seven, the run defense is still much better than what its secondary is. So I think if they can get him sitting in the pocket or trying to run, I think that's what they want him to do. If he's able to start picking them apart through the air, that's when I think Texas has problems.
Okay, fair enough. It's interesting from a standpoint of how you play a guy who scrambles like that, because I think when Johnny Manziel, who is the guy Diego Pavia gets compared to a lot, at least in our circles, the team that contained him best, LSU, my opponent this week, they were able to basically keep him in the pocket and make him beat them with the pass and spy him enough where if he tried to scramble, he wasn't going anywhere. But they didn't blitz him. They just made him stay in the pocket and make decisions. And that was, at that stage in his career, not a thing he was capable of doing at that level. It'll be interesting to see if that's the approach that the Longhorns take against Pavia. Because really, if you can bottle up Diego Pavia, you're going to win the game pretty handily.
And Texas is not really a blitzing defense anyway. They tend to try to get everything done with their front four. They did blitz a little bit more against Georgia than they normally do. So I suspect that will be that same approach of keep him in the pocket, use a spy, and hope that the back end of the defense holds up.
Are you worried also from a fan perspective that Vanderbilt put a net up over the student section where Texas tickets have been sold?
A nut?
A net.
A net.
They said it was for construction safety, but they also said we're putting it, where the Texas tickets have sold, and we'll probably leave it up for Tennessee too. Because if you aren't aware, you guys now have a reputation as a fan base
Oh, okay. I thought what the hell's the net for? Well, the water bottle thing was stupid. And I am not proud of that moment at all. I completely agree with I don't completely agree with Kirby Smart on that, but I do agree with the part about it setting a precedent that's not great. And I think it comes back to, we've talked about this before, both privately and on the show, of the nature of the Longhorn fan base is changing because Texas it's trying to get smaller. It's trying to get more elite academically, which means I have a feeling you're seeing more and more T-shirt fans at the game in places. And I think it's going to change the way the fan base is. You're not getting as many students that, like when my wife went to school and every student that could get in the ball game got into the ball game. It's just not working out that way now because of a lot of the students that are going to UT. And so I wonder how much of that was a factor. I'm not happy about it at all. I'm not proud of it. I was actually proud of the cheerleaders and the dance team who were helping to pick up all the water bottles off the field. For as much as it did make them get the call correct, it still, again, wasn't worth throwing the baby with the bathwater in that situation.
I thought it was very interesting that I know there's a lot of talk on the socials about, well, how is the SEC going to enforce that? Well, they enforced it. Texas was fined $250,000, which I know for Texas is not a big deal of money, but the athletic department doesn't necessarily want to have to pay that out. And because we live in a big brother world, they started finding students who had sports passes and revoking those sports passes using video surveillance and a couple of other methods to figure out who was.
Isn't that crazy?
So it's interesting. I mean, for people who think there's no repercussions for your behavior in the stadium, I think that kind of proves that there are.
Not when every single foot of that stadium is shot with a 4K camera that they can pretty much.
Well, that was always interesting, right? When they launched those, hey, find yourself in the crowd photos they used to promote really heavily a couple of years ago. And then you figured out why they have those cameras. It wasn't to sell that picture.
Right. Yeah. No, so I'm glad that the university's taken that step. I've seen a lot of people demand that Texas lose its alcohol privileges, and I can guarantee you that will never happen. So,
well, that was the threat. You either pay us the $250 or at least during SEC competition, there'll be no alcohol sales.
Yeah. And I just cannot see that actually.
Well, I mean, let's be honest.
Becoming a thing.
You could call Kevin FT or whatever his name is and get $250 in 30 minutes, however long it takes to make a wire.
Plus, I think a lot of those students who were throwing the bottles weren't of legal drinking age anyway. They got it into the ball game a different way. So, I've seen the clear flasks that fill the DKRs.
No idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. I don't want to talk about a couple of other games that are happening though. There's probably no reason to discuss a team that's favored to, or I guess, picked to lose by 20 points, but our favorite Dirt Burglars, man, 4-3, but it's happening the way we predicted, but in some ways faster than what we predicted for OU.
I think they're going to have trouble no matter how good their defense is on paper. They're going to have real trouble hanging with Ole Miss this weekend. It's a morning game. Ole Miss has to win to save their season. I don't know that there is any saving Oklahoma season at this point, so it'll be interesting to see how engaged those kids remain. But a lot of us were saying that, there's a reason that Venables interviewed a whole lot of places while he was at Clemson and didn't get hired. And it wasn't, I think, just waiting for Oklahoma's job to open up. They've got real systemic problems from a recruiting standpoint, from a talent standpoint, and I think just a how you play the football game standpoint. Yeah, they've had some bad luck with wide receiver injuries, but I don't know that if they had 3 healthy wide receivers right now, you pick any 3 back on the roster, that would fix their problems. They can't run the ball. They can't pass the ball. And when they play anybody who's of a similar caliber to their program, they can't stop the ball. So I don't know what exactly it is they do well outside of flipping over stagecoaches. This is another – hey, SEC fans, guess what? You don't need to be amazed by this because literally the Sooners do this every year. at least once a year, they flip that damn thing over and some homecoming queen flies out on the 20-yard line. It's just a thing they do.
Let's just say Oklahoma is not known for its engineering program, because that Sooner Schooner is the least safe vehicle on the planet. You're right. The thing flips over 2 or 3 times a year. There's always then you get PETA out there saying we shouldn't be doing it anyway, and all this stuff happens. But yeah, SEC fans, it's going to become a lot less cool to you guys much, much later down the road.
Yeah, but hey, I think Ole Miss pounds them this weekend. I think Lane Kiffin's got not necessarily. He's not in the realm of needing to save his job or anything like that, but he needs a statement game. He hasn't had one in a while. He does very well at home. He does very well against unranked teams, which Oklahoma is now. So I see Ole Miss winning by a lot.
One of the games I want to talk about, number 12 Notre Dame, number 24 Navy. I mean, is this when Cinderella goes home, or do you think that Navy can actually beat Notre Dame, is particularly running that option that nobody sees? I mean, they're running the ball all over the place. Any thoughts, any insight on that game? I'm sure it was not one you were prepared to talk about.
It is a ranked matchup because Navy is ranked 24th in the country right now against number 12. Navy's at home. From a talent perspective, from a recruiting rankings perspective, from a just Jimmy's and Joe's, Notre Dame should win this game pretty handily. However, Navy presents certain problems because of the type of offense they play and because teams don't see it a lot. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to play that game. If this was 1970, yes, maybe Notre Dame would be beating because they'd be seeing that offense every year.
Right.
But Navy is going to have surprises, have wrinkles. For Notre Dame to win this game the way they expect to win this game, they're going to have to be really disciplined on man football. And if Notre Dame's had some breakdowns this year, it's been that. I think they lost one of their better defensive backs or maybe safeties for the rest of the year, who was an NFL caliber player. So you've got a backup in there. Notre Dame also has, in the last 20 years has been a team that has been really highly thought of at the beginning of the year and finds ways to lose by the middle of the year. It'll be interesting. I don't think Navy wins this game, but I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think. And I think that Navy's going to give them all that they can handle on Saturday at 11 in the morning. That'll be the game that I tune into at 11 in the morning while I'm fretting over my brisket.
How much of that, though, explains what Navy and Army are doing this year, where, they're still running that very option-centered offense? And the further we get away from that, every year it gets a little bit further and a little bit further. Everything's 7-on-7 these days. How much of that, though, is why they've been able to be as competitive as they've been? And do you think that's something that will become kind of a regular fixture in college football, of Navy and Army hanging around because they are doing something so different?
So it's an interesting thing. And again, it's not something that I think we can quantify, and we won't know for a couple of years if this is right. But I think Army and Navy have a distinct advantage in this new world of NIL and unlimited transfers, because the kids that are playing for Army or Navy don't really have that option because they are in a military academy with a service commitments attached to the end of that run. So they're not going to necessarily, I think they have until their sophomore year, like Paul Skeens did, but that was with Air Force. So that may even be a different situation. But if you're in Annapolis, for instance, you get into the U.S. Naval Academy, you're there for a reason. It's probably not to play football. So the idea that you're going to transfer after your freshman year to go to LSU is probably not going to happen a lot. And I think that ultimately you have teams that are learning a new offense and new defense with new personnel every year against two teams that will be together for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And we'll have consistent coaching for 4 years, and we'll understand a system for 4 years a lot better than their opponents understand their own systems. I think that means that Navy and Army become more competitive. Now, ultimately, they don't draw the caliber of athlete that the other D1 schools draw. That's not going to change. We're not going back to the Roger Staubach days. Sorry, Navy, but that's just true. But I think you're going to see Navy and Army be a lot more competitive, a lot deeper into seasons, because they're teams that are really familiar with the systems they play in, and systems can still win college football games. That's not something that's going to change. What I think is going to change is you're not going to see as many systems, because you're going to have as simple as football as possible for these new guys coming in every year. And for some rosters, it's 20, 30 guys that are going to have playing time almost immediately, who are learning a new system. We talked about there's a lot of good teams. There's no truly great teams right now. That's a byproduct of that. That allows programs like Navy or Army to come in with, hey, we don't have these highly ranked guys, but we've got athletes who've been playing in the system for 4 or 5 years. So they understand what their limitations are, but they understand what they can do within the system. That gives them a tactical advantage. And if there's one thing the U.S. military is really great at, is tactical advantage. So,
yes, we are, Russia, still very good at tactical advantage, and we can out-recruit you. So,
even though we don't have no compulsory service.
Yeah. Although I guess now they're recruiting North Korea, but this isn't a politics show. All right, Andy, good luck to the Aggies this weekend. I do expect them to. It'll be a tight, fun one. Probably the game of the week anyway, because the rest of the games kind of are not, I don't want to say duds, but there's not a lot of ranked matchups this weekend.
There's a few. I don't know any of them are quite as high profile as this game, and not getting the attention certainly for being on the ABC 6:30 game. So hopefully A&M shows up. That's always the fear amongst A&M fans. I know you're going to love this, but we're wearing alternate uniforms.
Well, you know what? And I pulled them up, and I'm curious. Look, they look sharp. Okay, they do. But you know how my school handles the concept of that in football. How do you feel about it?
It doesn't bother me. The team wants it. And I know we've had this conversation for several years now. Recruits like the alternate uniforms. It's not the reason they make decisions, or otherwise Baylor would be winning national championships every year, because they've got like 62 uniforms. But it's a fun thing. I think if you're doing it one game a year, it's fine. If you're doing it every week, it gets old pretty quickly. A&M has chosen, and let's say, back up. The A&M football team chose to do this for this one game. The athletic department is not officially even promoting a blackout, but the football players are asking for a blackout. They're asking the fans. What's irritating to me, I get the tradition, I get the understanding, all that, but this is a one-time thing this season. If it goes well, they'll probably do it again next season. But the kids enjoy it. What's weird to me is the alumni who have put their foot in the sand, so to speak, and it's like, oh, I'm not wearing black ever. And it's just bizarre. College football games are supposed to be fun, right?
Yeah.
This is about a bunch of kids having fun for your enjoyment. If they're going to have more fun wearing a black uniform this week, yay, good for them. I do think the helmets especially look sharp. The uniforms to me are just the black version of our regular uniforms. It's not that big a deal.
Sharp with the script on the side.
Yeah, and if that became our a maroon version of that became our one of the rotation helmets, I'd be pretty happy with that. I don't think it hurts anything. It's not something that's going to change my life. It's not going to change the players' lives. It's not going to change the coaching life. It's not going to intimidate LSU. But if it's a thing that can get the 30,000 or 35,000 students who come as part of the ticket allotment and the fans to be on the same side as the team, which frankly, as good as A&M's fan support typically is, the Jimbo Fisher regime caused a lot of rifts between the football team, the athletic department, and the student body. If it's something that
quote Mac Brown, the BBs are out of the box.
Yeah. But if it's something dumb like one uniform a year can bring that back together and bring the students to a point where they feel like they're really part of the team, for whatever that's worth, then I think it's worth it. Again, I wouldn't enjoy it if they were doing it every week. I still think our colors are maroon and white, but this one weekend a year, it isn't hurting anybody. And if the players are for it, I'm all for it.
And it's funny because I can get fans being disappointed with their wearing on the field. I can't understand not wanting to have a good time and go along with also wearing black. It's not like you can't wear a black t-shirt that has A&M's logo on it. Like the idea that there are going to be some of your fans who are going to intentionally not wear black for reasons is a little disappointing.
I think the other thing is that if you look at the basketball team, they have a black uniform. If you look at the baseball team, they have a black jersey. If you look at the softball team, they have a black. I mean, every one of our athletic teams, except for the football team, has a black version of the uniform.
Yeah.
This has only become an issue with the football team now, and it's because of a group of grumpy old alumni. And I'm not young; I'm 53 years old. I don't ever want to be so old that I'm not wearing the color because the colors are colors and they're not our colors, and I can't root for a team. And I'm going to get
yeah.
It just I don't understand how you go through life being that upset about stupid, inconsequential bullshit.
Well, that's a good way to leave it. I think we're not going to be upset about. No, I completely agree, and yeah, I'm definitely one of the uniform traditionists for on the field. But if they told me to wear all white one day, I would show up and wear all white or whatever.
Well, I think the reality is we're down to like you in Alabama, because Ohio State has some alternate uniforms. Notre Dame has alternate uniforms now. USC has had alternate uniforms. So you guys toe the line, because I think it's down to the two of you.
Well, and I'd also like Notre Dame to quit wearing Kelly green as a uniform. It just doesn't look good on a football uniform.
I mean, Joe Montana won a Cotton Bowl in a Kelly green jersey, I think.
Yeah, something. I think he played the University of Texas when he won that Cotton Bowl too. So
or something, I don't know. Joe Montana did it. Totally fine.
There you go. All right, he is Andy Tom Cheston. I'm Jim Christopher. Everybody enjoy your college football weekend out there, and gig 'em and hook 'em.
Hook 'em.